I'm Bas Verplanken. I am Professor of Social Psychology at the Department of Psychology in the University in Bath. We are here at a symposium about sustainability. And my contribution to that symposium is a perspective from a social psychologist. I'm working in the area of behavior change, a broad area in consumer behavior, environmental behavior, health behavior. So my work is about why people behave as they do and what factors, what things drive their behaviors. Well, when we talk about sustainable behaviors, there are lots of questions that arise. First of all, what do people really associate with sustainable behaviors? Do people think about sustainability in the first place? So all the behaviors that we think that has to do with a sustainable environment are very often behaviors which people do in everyday life. They do that for all kinds of reasons, to get to work efficiently, to do their jobs at home, to have a comfortable life. They never do things because they want to contribute to a sustainable world. Now that is one of the problems that we are facing. If you think about health behaviors, and then health behaviors have a direct effect for an individual. It's good for an individual to live a healthy life, and you have immediate benefits of that. If you lead a sustainable life in terms of ecological sustainability, you don't see any results of that. And that is a very difficult issue. So one of the questions that we address is what do people associate with sustainable behaviors and sustainability in general? And the answers you get are actually very simple and vague. So simple in the sense of there are a few things that people associate with sustainability, things like separating your garbage and perhaps pollution of the environment and something about next generation, something about the future. But most people are not really very precise in what they mean. So they have a vague idea that we are messing up our environment and our children have to live with it, and that's not good. But how to address that issue and how the individual can contribute to the solutions, that's a very difficult thing for most people to get their head around. I will now talk about the majority of the population. I will in a minute talk about maybe some proportions of the population who are really very concerned about the environment. But in general, well, first of all, people have lack knowledge about sustainability. It's very difficult also to, let's say, to know what it means to switch off your lights all the time, compared to, for instance, driving your car to work or taking a plane to a holiday destination. It's very difficult for people to have an accurate idea of the carbon footprint, so to speak, of these behaviors. So I don't blame people. It's a very complicated issue. Another problem is that the consequences of what we are doing as a human species is something that is on a large scale. it plays out over a long period of time. The consequences are felt differently in different places. So we see on the news that there are storms, that there are flooding, there is drought, there is all kinds of things, wild things going on in the weather. But for most people, climate change and sustainability in general is a very abstract concept. So it's not easy also to make the connection between your individual behaviors and the life you lead as an individual and the larger scale problem of sustainability, climate change, and so on. So that's one problem. Another problem is that people are also not living in an individual bubble. They are part of social networks. They live lives with other people. And also their behavior is under influence of other people. So there is a lot of behavior which is guided by what we think other people think we should do, or what we think most other people are doing. And well, if most other people are not doing sustainable behavior, then there's no reason for an individual to do that. So that's a problem if you want to change behavior. If you want to change individual behavior, you actually have to change behaviors of larger structures and maybe communities, and well, sociologists might say, well, society as a whole. And then there's the issue of to actually know how to do things. So take a very simple example of the separation of your garbage, recycling. Now, there are so many examples of instructions to recycle which are so difficult, so complicated, and not consistent that, well, you can't blame people that they make mistakes, so to speak. It's not always easy to find out how to do things properly. Then there's the issue of, well, if we all would be motivated and willing to do things, then there are all kinds of other factors that may prevent you from actually doing it. Things that are related to practicalities, your family life may sort of let you do things in a different way than you actually might want to do. There are all kinds of reasons why our intentions are not materializing in actual behavior. Now there's also let's say the problem that many of the behaviors that we are talking about are conducted because of other reasons, as I said, than producing a sustainable environment. So it's a very complex network of behaviors that we are talking about. I mean, it's sort of common sense that habits are difficult to change, but the realization that we have habits is something that many policymakers and people or organizations who deal with behavior change do not realize enough. Habits are ingrained behaviors. Habits are behaviors that we do repeatedly, but not only repeatedly, we also do them on the automatic pilot. And that means that we're not aware of making choices. So take, for instance, commuting to work. Hardly anyone who has commuted to work for a while is thinking about, well, shall I do this today by car, or shall I walk, or shall I take the train? You choose the commuting that you usually do, and it's not a choice anymore. It's a fluent process. Now, if we're not aware of our behavior, then it's also difficult to change, and it's difficult for policymakers and change agents to let's say get across to people that there might be an option to change. So we've done a lot of work on habits in various contexts, and for instance, we've done an extensive program, an experimental program on what it means to have habits in terms of how people deal with information. And it's very clear that when strong habits exist, there is no interest in acquiring information about that behavior. There's no need to do that. There's no appetite for new information. And many policymakers or many designers of intervention assume that people are eager for information. That once you give information to people, that they will pick it up and perhaps follow it. Well, most people don't. Information campaigns are very often, they're badly designed, but even if they're well designed, they're not being picked up because people are not looking for information. So that's one thing. And the other is, when people have an ingrained habit, they also don't consider their attitudes. They don't consider their choices. And even if you would be able to change their attitudes and their intentions, then there is still the gap between attitudes and behavior, which is particularly large for people who have strong habits. It's difficult to change habits because they are ingrained, not only in how, let's say, the repetition and the routines that we have developed. It's also difficult because habits are triggered by the environment where we are behaving. So habits are cued by the environment. So very often we assume that we are in control, that we think about our behaviors, that we are responsible people, we are rational, and that's another way of saying that that our behavior is guided by our internal willpower. Now, habits are very much guided by the external world, and therefore it's actually more interesting, if you want to change habits, to look at the external world, how to architect, let's say, how to change the environment where behavior takes place. That might be more productive than trying to change a person's attitudes. Well, first of all, there is we have to make a distinction between, let's say, old habits that we don't want, or that policymakers don't want, and new behavior that we want to promote. So I will come back to that in a bit. Well, there are different approaches that you can think of. One is to look for segments of the population where habits are not so ingrained. That's a possibility. You can do segmentation of a population and try to find segments of the populations where interventions might be more effective. Now, the problem is those segments are usually the segments that are doing the behaviors that you want to promote already. So that's very often a difficult approach. An approach that we are investigating at the moment in our research is based on the idea that there are moments in a person's life course where habits are disrupted. Think about, let's say, kids going from school to university, or from university to work, or people moving house, people changing jobs, starting a family, retirement. Those are short periods where people's lives are a bit disrupted, and the habits that they come with may also be disrupted for a little while. In other words, there may be a sort of window of opportunity where the habits are not longer there for a while, and maybe not longer in the way, and maybe interventions that are focused on those windows might be more effective than if you just would do an intervention and address people while they are living their normal lives. We have done a study recently where we investigated what interventions, the effectiveness of an intervention among people who just moved house. And we compared that to people who hadn't moved house. And what we found was that actually the same intervention delivered to a group of people who have moved house versus a matched control group, so to speak, as we call it, who didn't move house, is actually giving better results. So apparently there's a short window where people have to rethink what they're doing and find new ways of doing things like shopping, like commuting, how they behave in their own house in terms of their energy use, shopping, food, and so on. And that little window of opportunity is, I think, an interesting focus for interventions. Yes, well, I think the question of agency is a good question. First of all, all psychology shows that we are not rational decision makers. So let's not pretend we are. We are not. And all the psychology research is also showing that we're making biased judgments. We are making shortcuts in how we process information and so on. But I think in a wider perspective, changing individual behaviors is not good enough. It's not sufficient. We need very bold changes and bold measures. The measures have to come, partly from individuals, but also very much from society as a whole. And because individuals make up a society, it's important to keep getting individuals with you in terms of getting a sustainability agenda working. But we need bold governments. We need companies to invent new technologies. We need politicians to be bolder than they are nowadays. There are people who do that. So there are citizens, there are individuals, there are groups of people who are very committed to the sustainability agenda. There are even businesses who really genuinely want to do something about this problem. There's a handful of politicians who actually are really committed. Now, I really think that these groups and individuals and politicians should work together a lot more than they do. And they have to carry this agenda. And I think if we are approaching the year 2100 and our great-grandchildren are looking back at the beginning of this century, I think we should now think of taking that responsibility and make those great-grandchildren proud that there have been people who never lost hope. We have to realize that we are sometimes very proud of ourselves as a species, and rightly so. We write beautiful poems, we can fly to the moon, we invent great things. But we also have to be a bit humble and realize that as a species we are very, very young. We're just walking around as humans, well, few million years. In terms of evolution, we haven't proven our case yet. And in order to survive, we really have to do that. We have to be very, very smart, and we have to be very, very compassionate. In terms of our evolutionary perspectives, yes, we can, but we shouldn't think that we already are there.